At the end of the last episode that I did on Face Off with my very good friend Joel, I was too distracted by how much fun I was having talking to Joel about what a ridiculous film that is to pick the next film. So I went to Twitter and I made a poll. The options were Lord of War, Bringing Out the Dead, National Treasure 2, and Wicker Man. The results of the poll were very close. Lord of War had 20%, Bringing Out the Dead had 26.7%, National Treasure 2 had 23.3%, but the winner with 30% of the vote was Wicker Man. Now, obviously, I was the one who chose these 4 movies. I made this poll, and part of me knew that Wicker Man was going to win. And the reason I included Wicker Man was the reason I knew it was going to win, because it's maybe the most infamous Cage movie in the age of memes. A lot of the episodes of this podcast have me talking about how, as someone who did not grow up watching movies with Cage in them, and as someone whose major exposure to Cage has been the internet, it's very shocking to me how often the movies are not well represented by their memes. The memes have done a great disservice to a lot of Cage's oeuvre. The big takeaway from that is about internet literacy in general, which can probably be mapped onto a lot of other problems that we have with critical thinking and critical reading, and just general knowledge acquisition. Now, I try to consume media critically, and I attempt to never take anything at face value, but I'm reminded time and time again through this podcast that my preconceived notions regarding Nick Cage have all been influenced by the internet's fascination with him, and that oftentimes those influences are not only uncharitable, but oftentimes completely false. Now, another reason I was reluctant to watch Wicker Man is because I was not excited about what I thought would be a grossly violent movie. I like violence in movies, a lot, don't get me wrong, but the violence for me needs to be aesthetically interesting, beautiful, dare I say, not gratuitous, and not the type that makes me wince in real life. The reason I expected Wicker Man to be the gross type of violence is because of the scene to which I'm obviously alluding. I, like a million other people with a pulse online, have seen the Not the Bees scene memed zillions of times, and presented as evidence not only for why this movie is terrible, but also for why Cage's acting is terrible. I had gone to YouTube to watch this scene in its entirety a few years ago. Just before the basket of bees is placed on the character's head, the islanders break the character's legs using a big hammer and some choicely laid pieces of wood. Think the ankle-breaking scene in Misery. Now, this part disturbs me probably more than most people, maybe because I've had bad knee injuries in the past, I don't know, but I get really grossed out by broken bones in movies. So my knowledge of this movie was thus: Not the Bees makes it look ridiculous. There's a gross bone-breaking part. It's a remake of the 1973 Wicker Man movie, which I hadn't seen, but assumed to be very grossly violent, because Midsummer, the 2019 folk horror movie, which is obviously in conversation with the 1973 Wicker Man movie, has a lot of secondhand pain-inducing scenes. I know, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, and that's my point. These assumptions really limited my viewpoint, and were all ultimately proved wrong. Almost like assuming things based on internet trends is a bad idea, especially when it's about things that are more important than movies. Anyway, knowing that I was making a lot of assumptions about the 2006 Wicker Man movie, I hummed and hawed about first watching the original Wicker Man. Before watching the 1973 Wicker Man, I thought that, there's probably benefits to going in completely blind to the 2006 Nick Cage version, but there are also probably benefits to watching the original. I joked to a friend that I would just watch the video for Burn the Witch by Radiohead instead. But in the end, I decided to watch the original Wicker Man movie. And I'm so glad I did. That's another movie that I had preconceived notions about that were mostly wrong. I was expecting a hokey B-movie type exploitation film, filmed with shock and awe, because I assumed that Midsummer was modeling a lot of itself on the type of movie I thought the 1973 Wicker Man must be. I'm not saying that Midsummer is a B-movie or hokey. I'm saying that it has lots of shock and awe. By the way, the video for Burn the Witch by Radiohead also has very few similarities to the movie. The original Wicker Man from 1973 stars Christopher Lee, in what Christopher Lee later went on to say is his best role and his best movie. I always kind of thought that was tongue-in-cheek, but I totally understand where he's coming from now. He reportedly did the movie for free because he thought it was so awesome, and knew that the studio couldn't afford him. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to. It's creepy and sometimes gross, but it's not gory or shocky or schlocky either. After watching it, I understood that Hot Fuzz is a parody of Wicker Man in a lot of ways. And if you're a fan of Scarfolk or other weird British Isles folk horror stuff, you need to see the 1973 Wicker Man. Though I'm probably the only person who is a huge fan of Scarfolk and the like and hadn't seen Wicker Man. Anyway, I love this movie, and I was talking to some friends about how I was doing this Wicker Man double feature because I'm podcasting on the 2006 Nick Cage Wicker Man. A friend of mine said that they will never forgive the studio and the marketing company for marketing the 2006 Wicker Man as a remake of the 1973 rather than as a parody of the 1973. I'd never heard this take before, and I'm so glad that my friend said it to me, because it made me go into the 2006 movie with a different perspective. Listen, I know why you picked this movie. I know why you wanted me to do an episode about this movie. You wanted me to tear this movie apart. You wanted me to talk about how shitty it is, and how over-the-top Cage is, and how stupid it is that they even made the remake in the first place. I went into the 2006 Wicker Man, having just finished the 1973 Wicker Man, and under the suggestion that this movie is a parody and not a remake. And I'm here to tell you that I enjoyed the 2006 Wicker Man. There. I said it. If you've seen the 2006 version and you hated it, I invite you to watch it again as a double feature with the 1973 one and look at it with new eyes and an open mind to it as a parody, not as an attempt at a remake. See if you can enjoy it more. And I'll be explicit here about why I think it deserves that. I want to really hammer, pun intended, on something right from the outset of what is assuredly going to be a rant of me defending this movie. And that is the aforementioned Not the Bees scene. The scene that has turned this film into a joke on the internet, and I argue, irreparably damaged Cage's career in the public eye, especially the eye that know him not as much from his movies, but from memes. Before I watched this movie, I was like, well, I know at least that the thumbnail for this episode will be that meme of Cage's character with a basket of bees on his head screaming. I also knew that I would obviously be sampling that audio bit during the episode, perhaps repeatedly, especially because I was worried that there wouldn't be much to talk about if the movie sucked as much as everyone said it did. Now, some other episodes of this podcast have been spoiler-free, because I know that some of you listen to the episodes and then decide if you'd like to watch the movie. This episode will not be spoiler-free. And in fact, this episode has a spoiler in it that is in and of itself an anti-spoiler, because here's the astonishing, bewildering thing that I discovered about this movie. The Not the Bees scene is not even in the film! You all lied to me, you all lied to the internet, and you disparaged my boy's name, and for what? For what? For what? Let me explain for those of you who haven't seen it. Those of you who have seen it, I am so disappointed in you. Just like the 1973 movie, Wicker Man 2006 ends with a police officer being put in the Wicker Man and burned alive in a ritualistic sacrifice. The sacrifice is necessary, according to the inhabitants of the island in each movie, because the island's crops the previous year had failed. In the 1973 movie, the crop is apples. In the 2006 movie, the crop is honey, hence the bees. The Not the Bees scene happens immediately before the Wicker Man scene. Cage's character is subdued with bee stings because he is allergic to bees, and would thus go into shock. A detail that, by itself, makes the scene slightly less ridiculous in my opinion, but nevertheless. As I mentioned, his legs are broken before the bee basket part. When it came time for the Islanders to put Cage's character into the Wicker Man, the audio of them breaking his legs plays over a visual of them processing toward the Wicker Man. I was confused but relieved, as it meant I didn't have to watch his legs get broken. But then I realized that the bee basket was just cut. There was no audio from it, no visual. It didn't exist. The next scene, he's in the Wicker Man and burning. I obviously paused it and took to the internet. Did they release a new version because everyone ridiculed the scene so much? Nope. The theatrical version of this movie, the DVD version of this movie, the HBO version of this movie never had the Not the Bees scene. It was a deleted scene that appears in the extras on the DVD and someone uploaded it to the internet. This is like someone taking part of a blog post that I thought better of, or a podcast part that I recorded and regretted and then deleted, and taking that and putting it up on the internet, making it go viral, and then making it become emblematic of me and everything I create. I mean, Can't a director decide that a part is too silly for the theatrical version, and can't they, out of the goodness of their heart, include it as a funny extra on the DVD? No. Because it means that people will take it completely out of context, assume that it's representative of the whole movie, and the whole actor. I'm ashamed that I've let the deceitful internet machine make me think ill of this movie and this actor who I've come to adore. It's almost like he was made a scapegoat and burned alive in a sacrifice for our own satisfaction or something. Now that you all understand the peripeteia I experienced at the end of the 2006 Wicker Man, I want to say that I was enjoying the movie before the shock. Even. Again, this is largely because I was looking at it as a parody. By the way, the fact that Nick Cage was cast should have been an indication that this movie was a parody, but I won't dwell on that. The movie is interesting in its own right. I'll point out some differences between it and the 1973 version. The 2006 Wicker Man reimagines the story in the Pacific Northwest of the United States instead of the fictional Scottish Isle in the 1973 version. By reimagining it in the US, it's already, in a lot of ways, a joke. I'm asking you to be in on the joke, laughing with it instead of laughing at it, which really is a good tagline for Cage's career in general, as I've said in previous episodes. So instead of Summer Isle in the UK, we have Somers Isle, off the coast of Seattle. Now, I've been to Bainbridge Island twice. It's an island, a large island, off the coast of Seattle. The fictional Somers Isle would be much smaller, but it has a lot in common with Bainbridge Island. I went to Bainbridge Island to visit my friend's mom's hippie commune. Sound familiar? My friend's mom and her lesbian partner run a pagan-ish, women-focused commune on Bainbridge Island where travelers can stay in yurts, participate in ritualistic bonfires and crying ceremonies, and contribute their menstrual blood to the compost heap if they so choose. I've been twice, and it's a wonderful place in a beautiful forest exactly like the one in the movie. Needless to say, I didn't think that what was happening on Somers Isle was that far-fetched. Not only because of my own experience on Bainbridge Island, but also because, having just watched the 1973 version, it was clear that the director was mirroring scenes from the 1973 movie, but turning them on their head by making it a matriarchal society. The women Cage's police officer character encounters are the ones in charge. They occupy the pub exclusively, making Cage's character wonder if it's ladies' night. There's a brief shot where two men are told to get out so that other women can sit down, which is the beginning of making us understand that this is not only a matriarchal society, but that the men are second-class citizens, as Cage's character later accuses. But if you had watched the 1973 version, you remind yourself that everything everyone on this island is doing is a show for one audience member. The way the men can't even look at Cage's character in the eye, because they're so subservient, is all an orchestration to help trick him into thinking that this is a place where a little girl has gone missing for evil reasons. The cleverness of the 1973 and 2006 versions is that these are stories about a whole island conspiring to completely mindfuck a cop. The way the 1973 version does it is more effective, in my opinion, because I felt that the added layers of the missing girl being Cage's character's daughter and the PTSD flashbacks to the accident he witnessed at the beginning of the movie were added to make the movie more jump-scary and sensational and maybe palatable to a 2006 audience. But at the core of each of these movies is an interesting unreliability, where the characters cannot be trusted even while they're telling you not to trust them. You at once want to root for and against the protagonist, because he's a cop and fuck cops, but also because the narrative forces you to wonder what's really going on. He's lied to, and he's also given chances to save himself, which he ignores, because of his own sense of authority, not only as a cop, but also as a man. Some women of the island purposely play on his desire to be their savior by appearing helpless. Others attempt to anger him and make him make bad decisions by deliberately trying to make him feel threatened in his masculinity. These aspects are missing from the 1973 movie, and in the 2006 version, they're interesting but perhaps not handled in the best way, and thus miss the chance to truly be a fun and subversive look at gender politics, and even a look at the definition of that term. Another cool thing about this movie, for me specifically, is why the matriarchal society exists. The leader of the island, Sister Somers Isle, played by the incandescent Ellen Burstyn, explains to Cage's character that her ancestors wound up on the island because they escaped the Salem witch trials of the late 17th century. If you don't know, my dissertation research is about narratives of the Salem witch trials, specifically about representations of masculinity in those narratives, so this was a neat surprise. Anyway, being pagans and seeing what was happening to those who were accused as witches, they fled and ended up as far west as they could possibly get. Thus, they continued to practice their pagan religion. Sister Summersisle also explains that the colony, she uses the word on purpose to link it to the bees, quote, love their men. They're just not subservient to them. I think she's being truthful here. As I said, I believe that the way the men behave around Cage's character is all in service of the ruse. My reasoning for this is that at the end of the film, the men join in the ritualistic sacrifice in a way that makes them seem equal. I also think that part of the way the ruse works is that Cage's character knows nothing about pagan beliefs, which don't place any gender above any other. I'm not saying it's impossible for the colony to be quote-unquote bad pagans. I'm just saying that it's unlikely in the narrative, especially when compared to the way that the 1973 movie Islanders dupe their own cop. The Islanders go far to make Cage's character believe that men are unwelcome at best. The classroom scene, which is almost line for line from the 1973 version, includes a trapped bird the schoolgirls are torturing, which they take great care to refer to as him. The maypole, which in the 1973 version is completed by the schoolboys, is already completed, but male children are never seen. The implication Cage's character reveals to believe later being that male children are killed. And the schoolteacher aggressively accuses Cage's character of being quixotic, which she defines for him as being a pursuer of loftier and practical ideals, and then loudly adds, usually a man. This character contrasts with Cage's character's ex-fiancée, Willow, who wrote him the letter asking him to come to the island to find her missing daughter. In the 1973 movie, the letter to the police officer is anonymous. Adding the level of intimacy in the 2006 movie makes it maybe more cruel, but I can't say I really think it's necessary or very effective. Maybe I have to think about it more. But this level of connection that Cage's character has to the island by being Willow's ex, and then finding out that he's allegedly also the father of the missing girl, is the major departure from the 1973 version, and is the reasoning behind the aforementioned mechanics of jump scares and other cliches I thought the movie could do without. I'll comment too on another often memed part of the movie, which is when Cage punches a woman while wearing a bear suit. This is lifted completely from the 1973 movie. The cop character disguising himself to join the ritual so that he can find the sacrifice, who he knows will be the missing girl, and clocking the person nearest the girl, then saving her, only to be led by the girl to his own doom. Now, in the 1973 movie, it's not played for laughs. He doesn't punch a woman, he punches a man, and he's not wearing a bear suit, he's wearing the punch suit, as in Punch and Judy. The fact that the scene is funny in the 2006 version is another clue that this movie is a parody. I'd go so far as saying that this movie understands that it's a parody of remakes in general. A 1973 folk horror movie about a Scottish island remade in modern-day America is a comment on the nostalgia industrial complex, in my opinion. Right around when this movie came out, we saw the beginning of Hollywood remakes that became so ubiquitous you don't even think of them as remakes anymore. Stranger Things and Ready Player One and so many other properties exist because big media knows you love nostalgia, and you love talking about how wrong they got your favorite childhood memories, even more than you like talking about how they got them right. Wicker Man 2006 is absurd and ridiculous. Christopher Lee himself wondered why they'd ever need to make a remake of Wicker Man. My argument is that that's exactly why they did it. The absurdity of it is the point. I'm not saying that this was even an entirely successful parody. There are things that this movie fails at, certainly. I hated how explicitly they explained the big reveal at the end, but I assume they were forced to do that because any nuance in movies these days has to have its legs broken with a big hammer. I also dislike the weird hive mother scene with Ellen Burstyn and her ladies-in-waiting, because Cage's character wasn't present for that part. So their acting like this muddied the message of artifice that I argue the rest of the movie has. And if you're wondering why, by the way, I keep saying Cage's character, it's because I didn't catch his name at all during the movie. And when I went to record this, I looked it up, but upon reading it, I wanted to save it for the end, as a kind of final argument for why I think this movie is doing more than the internet gives it credit for. In the 1973 movie, the cop is named Sergeant Neil Howie. Names are really important in both movies, as the inhabitants of the island have names that are related to the earth. Holly, Rowan, Willow, Rose. At one point, Sergeant Howie points out that some deceased islanders had biblical names, and the record keeper explains that this is because they were very old, and their names are relics of Christianity that no longer occupies the island. In the 2006 version, Cage's character also points out that all of the islanders have names that are nature-related, including his ex-fiancée Willow and their daughter Rowan. By the way, the pub in the 1973 version is the Green Man, referring to the ancient pagan representation of rebirth. While in the 2006 version, the pub name isn't given, but the sign briefly shown depicts women dancing naked in a circle. Anyway, I looked up the name of his character, thinking it would be inconsequential. Much more important is that he's a cop and all cops are bastards, obviously. Well, Cage's character's name is Edward Malus. M-A-L-U-S. I was surprised that this name was much more interesting than I thought it would be, and then again I admonished myself for making an assumption about the movie. Hadn't I learned yet? Now, malice is the Latin word for bad, unpleasant, pain, injurious, etc., from which the French word mal is derived, and also, the English word malice, M-A-L-I-C-E. It's also related to the word malleus, which, guess what, in Latin means hammer, or if you will, mallet. How do I know that? The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, was the 15th century treatise on witchcraft that gave rise to what we call the witch hunts in Europe, which in turn influenced what happened in Salem in the 17th century. Now, part of my dissertation is about how we misremember Salem because of how the Salem witch trials have been conflated with the European witch hunts. So, what I'm reading is a conflation here for this name is part of the problem there. But you know what else malice refers to? M-A-L-U-S. Malice is also a genus of apple, like the crop around which the 1973 Wicker Man revolved. I think this is really neat, and I think it's definitely on purpose. Finally, to comment a bit on Cage's performance, it's great. It's exactly what it needs to be. It's pitch perfect. He's being pushed to his limit, so he's very well cast. And the way he plays his cop is laughing incredulously in a kind of like, are you kidding me kind of way. Much more so than the very serious 1973 character is, I argue, even more proof that this is a parody, not a remake. Cage's character is just as incredulous and just as astounded as we are. By the way, listeners of the podcast will understand why I'm saying this. I thought he's pretty damn handsome in this one too. Go figure. Alright. I hope I've successfully rattled a few cages with what is surely a reading of this movie you didn't expect. Remember to follow on social media at Rattling Cage Pod on Instagram and Twitter. And support the podcast, if you like, by going to ko.com/DIEZYN. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time when I talk about The Family Man.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!